but they didn't agree because it's not bad. I can understand that.
The locals here are not happy with that treatment of the reserve, and it's
So it was just a really interesting soundbite that I heard it on national radio last year, and I thought that was kind of an illuminating insight for me. So if we just review, what were the locals concerned about? What was their problem?
Smell.
Yeah, rubbish in the bushes at their local beach. Yeah. And what were the tourists' issue?
No,
Yeah,
wasting energy.
Yeah, just throwing it in the rubbish. That's not the right place for organic matter. So I thought this was an interesting kind of highlight, that it showed that, to me, that the locals cared deeply about their beach and wanted to keep it beautiful and take really good care of it. And here were these people travelling in and just throwing their rubbish into the bushes. They felt outrage at that. You know, the smell would draw rats, possums, vermin, whatever. And then the Swiss were like, well, actually, I don't think it's right to throw my compost into the rubbish bin. And while they said it was going to get burnt, that doesn't actually happen so much in New Zealand. It will just go to a landfill and decompose, give off methane, whatever, or not decompose, depending on how deep the landfill is. So they kind of had a wider, they kind of blurred the boundary. They saw that putting rubbish in a rubbish bin here had consequences elsewhere. And I'm not sure the locals had that same awareness. And I thought that was a really interesting way to illuminate this kind of mobile versus local perspective on environmental issues. So, having now talked a bit about this, one of the other things I think is really interesting is that on the same program that discussed freedom campers in New Zealand, there was widespread anger from locals at tourists. And yet when they interviewed tourists, they said that they saw just as much going on from the locals. So it was New Zealanders who were leaving a trail of destruction around the countryside, in their opinion. And I think that othering, that kind of, it's somebody else who's causing the problem, is an easy trap to fall into, because then we're lily white, it's their problem, and we need to address that. And while I think there is a place for legislation, I think there's a lot more place or space for getting engaged with people and starting to talk about what the solutions can be, and a place for education. Because quite frankly, if enforcement is the solution to the freedom campers leaving rubbish around the place, gee, we have enough trouble policing our urban centres where there's lots of police around. Can you imagine? Are we going to station police out at camping grounds, lurking behind trees to see if people have done the right thing? Yeah, it seems a bit implausible. So for me, education is a much better way to approach it. And I see the place-based approaches, those connecting to places, being really important. But I also see that drawing a wider perspective of the environment, our environment does not finish at this point. It is a global situation, it's a global ecosystem, and by removing rubbish from one environment, we're not actually solving anything in the global picture. So, place-based people who have argued, some of the more extreme people, argued about placelessness and deterritorialised populations. And I am concerned about those. But it seems that mobile people do not necessarily lack environmental ethics, but they might benefit from place-responsive knowledge. Cultural and environmental knowledge about a particular place will be helpful. Locals who have lived in an area for a long time don't lack environmental ethics either. but they might benefit from that shared perspective. And I argue that place can be defined on various different scales, from a neighbourhood to a multinational or even a global scale. And I think it's that global scale that we want to be addressing as well. So, mobile people and environmental ethics education is going to need a multi-layered approach, because there's some way, you can't just get away with a slogan. That's not going to be helpful. And that's a real challenge, engaging fast travellers or mobile people such as myself with environmental ethics. And education should provide an invitation for people to engage with their local places and their local issues. Even for people with a disjointed. That's our local beach at Brighton. Lovely.
That's cool.
Can you read it? It's Whatu Maru Maro He Tamata Tuitu Te Whenua. People come and go, but the land endures.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, very good. No, any questions or comments?
Yes, Brad.
So what do you propose to those final points
Yeah.
that you have there? So what would that look like if it is going to be multiple perspectives?
Great. Okay, so
Yeah.
say you've, in a classroom, for me, that would mean that recognising the language that I use can be exclusive. For example, if I use placelessness and deterritorialise a lot, I may marginalise people who are highly mobile, who have travelled a lot, who haven't dwelt in this particular location for a long time, and they may feel like this place responsiveness is not accessible to them. So if I change my language and I use it as an invitation to engage and less labelling, then I can kind of pour down deeper and offer that invitation to connect there. And it also means recognising the wider perspectives of people who have travelled and have different experiences and different ideas about how environmental ethics might look. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I agree with you, Chris, about addressing the complexity of things. Like I agree, I don't think, having two sides, this is not a helpful thing, because most things in life are really complex. There are lots of varying perspectives, and I think education should be about exploring those perspectives and understanding other people's perspectives. And I guess it helps, which in the long run, hopefully, develops strategies and understandings and tolerances.
And I think that kind of ties in with some of your work, Judy, on the post-critical, is kind of being in that space where it is a contested space and being open to different, within that, being open to different perspectives. At the same time, and I'm struggling with keeping these together, is this idea that I think there are more correct things to do in some situations, and there are better ways of doing things. And being open to lots of different perspectives, but also, being aware that it's not just, ultimate subjectivity. There are some things that are better.
Well, if you join all of that conversation back to your ethical decision making, then people make decisions based on what they believe is the most right.
Right.
Yeah, to do good or to prevent harm.
Which comes from education, of course.
Yeah.
Because as you have more perspectives, of course, to build on that knowledge,
Yeah.
you can engage in a lot of different ethics, I guess,
Yeah.
or new ethics, or globalized ethics as well. Yeah.
It's interesting that ethics isn't really taught in schools. I'm learning through religious education. Thinking about it every day.
I think science ethics gets covered.
Oh yeah, it does. That's true. And
So we look at it with education. That's fair. It's a leverage enough.
Depends, yeah.
But I think, post-critical possibilities, I don't mind. It's a project with possibilities there. Because it is a critical in there, it's still concerned not with absolute relativism, but concerned with issues of justice. So, and I think this is a really good example of it, because it highlighted, especially the Freedom Campus soundbite, to me, that highlighted complexity beyond the mainstream media's sort of push. Freedom camps are bad.
Yeah.
Locals are good.
Yeah.
It's beyond the simplicity that dualistic kind of there's good and bad, but actually the layers of complexity. Which, as you point out, requires a multi-layered kind of response, and I guess that's your challenge, isn't it? To kind of consider all of the different variables and then how best to thread them together into a pedagogical approach, or.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
That's a good question.
Yes. To go with this, just another example that I've just come across is one of the schools that I'm working with back home in Canada. It's an eco school or an eco classroom, they call themselves. And they've decided to all use netbooks, computers, and go paperless. And now it's funny because they're being critiqued though, because of course using electricity in Saskatchewan is on coal. So actually your footprint is actually, so then they went, and it was funny because, it's almost that can't win, right? Because the area of critique is so big now, where you can critique anything. You constantly be like, no, you can't do that.
Yes.
Whether it be cultural, environmental, social, whatever it is now, and I just find it really interesting that there's professors that are on this grade 8 classroom being like, they're proud that they're a paperless classroom, which I'm like, that's great, that's a great thing, but, your whole footprint is through the roof. Because every single time you turn on that computer, of course, you're using, it's like,
I think that is a really interesting, every step, it's like I see it repeated, the Green Revolution, where they made these amazing high-yielded rice crops, and so they sold the seeds, and it was going to solve world hunger. That was in the 60s. But the rice required fertilizer and various inputs, I think maybe pesticides as well, that weren't available to the family farmers. And so they ended up going out of business, and the corporations took over because they had the infrastructure and the funding to do it. So this idea, brilliant scientific idea, high-yielding rice will solve world hunger, boom, all these people are off their farms and things like that, and it's kind of a short-term solution that seems really good, and then as you go down, it's like, maybe that wasn't quite as good as we thought. It's probably not as devastating as that. But I think that we are on a process where we will find what we're doing today will have other consequences. And I think when they first got rid of horses and carts, because there's so many flies and so much horse shit in the streets, it was revolting. And there's so much complaints about it. And the motor car was clean. Fewer flies, such a good solution to that problem. It just keeps coming along. And I guess if we just take everything to the ultimate extreme, like some is good, more is better, we probably end up at those endpoints where we've kind of, amplified our problems. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I don't think that, like Brad, you pointed out, critique, it's so easy to critique. And I think we should boldly make those steps, but also cautiously make them,
But actually, the critique is not a very fair critique, is it? Because actually you're just a user of electricity. Actually, it's the electricity companies, the power generation companies that need to be held up and held on themselves.
That's right.
So,
For sure, and especially for our province that uses coal.
Yeah.
And we're the first country that burns coal. That's insane.
But so,
We're not willing to make the expenditure through taxes and everything else to actually do something else.
it's like four steps, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's about,
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. So it becomes that scale of what's worse. Like you could draw up a scale, right? So if coal is the worst, then we can go to hydro. Well, great, hydro is great because it's renewable, but yet you displace people and communities and different things. You know, like that whole scale thing. But the funny thing with this class is they had actually reflected and come up as a class to become a paperless. So it wasn't they just decided, you know. They'd actually gone through a reflection process with the teachers and decided, and that was one of the things they came up with. No, it's better to be paperless, especially in a school, to promote that. You know, but then all of a sudden, honestly, 2 professors like went and like critiqued it, and I was just like, holy cow.
That's their job.
I wanted, like, this is part of it, you know, but
It's
then
not constructive though.
it wasn't then, yeah, like, you know, they put forward something better. It was just a critique. It was just
Yeah.
a blatant critique and then out. And it was like, great, you just brought down 13-year-olds.
Yeah,
You
God,
know,
you win.
well done, you know, but so now what,
And
as
then,
academics?
and the risks there are, I find this, even with the students here, the undergrads that I work with, is the risk is paralysis.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it.
Doesn't have anything.
And I don't want to put myself out there, so I'm just going to toe the line and keep doing what I'm
Yeah,
doing.
this is
because
too big, it's beyond me.
That's right.
There's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
And I'm fighting that so much. It's the biggest resistance
Yep.
to change.
And understand, I mean, you don't want to be critiqued too, especially in academia. You don't want somebody just
Right.
hammering down all your ideas, you know, that it's
Without
not.
providing other possibilities.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's the responsibility.
Exactly, yeah. That it is complex, exactly that. You know, well, you just went to, okay, well, you're just using carbon footprint. Great, in that one area, that's fine.
Yeah.
You're correct that way. But now looking at a whole school, then actually creating a paperless school would be fairly interesting, actually. to-
So did any of the academics actually say, well, isn't this amazing? We had a group of students here who have gone through a reading process and taken action.
Yeah.
And actually
Yeah.
taken action to change something that seems a problem, which is an awesome learning outcome.
Right.
Yes.
Pretty amazing.
And so empowering to,
Yeah, and that's the thing. And they came up as a class with this. It wasn't a top-down approach where principals were like, you're going to do this. And teachers were like, hey, we're going to do this. Actually, the kids decided that they want to do this. And then expenditure of funds confused, of course. It was a whole process. So.
So I'm just curious, as the people around the table here, how many of you consider yourselves mobile? Yep.
Oh, it's all relative, I guess. Not really, no.
Yep.
Have we had it on our?
Yep.
Well, what are you working on?
That's exactly it, right? So what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I guess
That
for
you
me,
move a lot.
yeah,
You're from place to place, or that you visit.
I would say, that's interesting, that's a good question. I would say that for me, mobile means that your place of dwelling or whatever has changed either nationally or internationally.
And if you have a holiday, that's most time here, but actually spend time there too.
Yeah.
Or
Well, it could also be if you live outside of Christchurch and you commute into the
Yeah.
city every day, you know, like,
Right.
when you consider yourself a local, then, you know, or are you local?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like that whole localism thing is a question that,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
you know, like,
Scales.
is it on a global scale or is it
Yeah.
just a local, you
Yeah.
have to be within 1 kilometer radius for therefore that's your place? You know?
Mm.
Or community, what is a community?
Yeah.
How small is
that's
a
true.
community? Is it just this district that the school
Yeah.
has defined, or is it,
Mm.
can you go across that?
We did an exercise when we first came to university where they that whole class was stand in sports hall and put themselves on the map of the world.
Yeah.
Most of the people were from New Zealand. They couldn't think outside the world, so they were stood way up there. And I was like, where are you from? Well, I'm from, Auckland. It's all New Zealand.
Yeah, that's right. That's interesting. Yeah. That is interesting. Oh, that's interesting. It's like the globe. Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
did you laugh?
Yeah.
I did. I even said, I'm here in the Royal Hemisphere. What are you doing? No idea. They still even talk about it now as when you were put yourself on the map of New Zealand. I heard that recently. When I did that thing where you put yourself on the map of New Zealand and I wasn't the world. Yeah, no idea.
I'm sorry if I was excluded.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, I hope this discussion's been interesting for you, and yeah, thanks for coming along.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah,
Well,
thank
thank
you.
you for us,
Very
it's
good.
awesome, yeah.
We'll just amplify that.
That's right.
Switzerland, French accent.
Because the Germans were way ahead of the
Right, separating us before. Yeah, yeah, right.
I was wondering what is right, both globally.
Right, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Well, he brought a European to that, they incinerated everything, so there's a huge output.
Yeah, so I didn't actually understand the New Zealand concept.
No, yeah.
But, you know, for him and his partner, you know, it was, you know, you separate. I know a lot of tourists that are offended when they go places and there's no opportunities to separate their rubbish and recycle things.
You would want to take it easy yourself.
Really,
It's not
it's not economic. Well, I understand that that's what they do in China as well, for the plastic that gets recycled. Yeah. Well, it's the idea that one day we'll be able to go mine our plastics. You know? We've put it down there. It's turned back into petrol.
We find exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the coal argument is interesting because we have huge high-grade coal and we sell to China.
Yeah.
Stockpile
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
and then slowly do it themselves. Like, and we import shit coal to do whatever we do with our coal.
Oh, that's right. They put it under the sea, don't they, or something like
Yeah,
that?
then they stockpile
Yeah.
all of the high-quality coking coal because of their steel production.
Yeah.
And they don't have the coal really.
Right.
Buying up all of the money essentially so they can continue their steel production. Yeah, we sell off our great coal and then we buy lower quality coal for our fuel production. Why are we digging our own coal up and
Yeah.
moving it if we're going to move coal?
Right, as opposed to getting it from, yeah,